All right, hello everyone. John Frausto with Topspin Tennis. Very fortunate to have John Carpenter and Chuck Tomlin of Congruent Tennis. This is the first of like a podcast that we're going to do, and want to really highlight Congruent Tennis, all things tennis. We got three topics that we're going to discuss today, and just really looking forward to this session. So without further ado, let's introduce Chuck and John. John Carpenter. You and I go way back. We did the 53 drills for better tennis with Oscar Wagner. I always want to make sure I let people know that, you know, I was a part of that DVD, but John, a lot of those drills, most of them were yours. So you were the brains behind that. So thank you for joining us today. Tell me a little bit about yourself, your background, and what you're doing today.
Yeah, I always dreamed of being a tennis coach. I got certified originally with the USPTA, and then PTR had a $50 special if you switch on over in the early 1980s. And I was just a part-time coach, coached at Riverside City College, summer programs for kids in Riverside, California, 84, 85, 86, but never hit it full-time. I was always working in the corporate world or teaching. Something like that. And then around 98, I decided I wanted to be a full-time coach after I had a successful company venture for a couple of years. Thought I could, you know, maybe possibly retire early. That didn't work out. But I wound up becoming a tennis coach when I started looking at contrarians. And I worked with Oscar Wagner for 12 years. And in 2004, Andy Davis and I kind of joked that somebody needs to write the history of tennis instruction because people were making claims that were obviously demonstrably wrong. And then when I became head pro at Dwight Davis Tennis Center the next year, Andy planned to go to Newcomb's as junior tennis director. I decided to go ahead and write this history of tennis instruction book. I got 15 years in it. It's 3 volumes, 1,000 pages, about 350 pages each. And I've learned a lot of cool things that, you know, it could be argued that the modern forehand as it's taught today was taught in the 1890s by a woman. The 1890s, I want you to think about that. Semi-open stance, hitting across the ball, things like that. The first tennis book ever written talked about hitting across the ball in 1878. And a lot of what we see today might be just coming full circle. It's just, as Chuck would say, it's amplified by a little technology, a little strength, nutrition, things like that. And I studied almost every tennis instruction I could find on earth. And in 2015, a team of us flew to Atlanta, met Chuck Tomlin here to find out whether he was the real thing. He had some contrarian theories, which he'll go into regarding shot matching and some of his innovations that came out of the smart targets, which he showed to me in 2007. And I am now convinced that the congruent tennis model is the best model by which to learn tennis with. Works for the greatest percentage of players. It helps explain the pros way. And if you teach beginners this way, I teach 4-year-olds beginning with these same concepts. It works better than any other method I've ever found, and anybody's free to challenge this claim. But until then, I have named the congruent tennis model the #1 tennis pioneering innovation of the 21st century.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I had a chance to observe it in person a couple of years ago, and it is really good. We could probably do another video on the history of tennis. That's going to be a separate video, but that's interesting. I've had a chance to read a few pages of the book, and it's fascinating. And if you're a tennis historian, you're going to absolutely love it. Thanks a lot, John. Let's move on to Chuck. Chuck, tell us a little bit about your background, about Congruent Tennis, and what you're doing today.
Well, I got a little interesting start because I came from probably more from other sports. I always enjoyed tennis, but just thought of it as a hobby, fun sport. You know, it was always something I could play with my girlfriends in high school, that kind of thing. And we ended up having a high school team, and it actually discontinued the team. And then the principal asked me if I would sort of coach and captain the team if we would have one. And we had the first winning season that year. That my high school had ever had, but I was still more of a football player, more baseball player, doing those things. Went to Auburn, played football. Really didn't play much tennis, but when I came back to Atlanta, Alta sucks everybody up. If you have any interest at all in tennis, you're going to get sucked in by Alta here in Atlanta. Got started playing again, and then I think that inspired my oldest son. He liked watching to play, and he wanted to learn to play. So I started sharing the game with him, and he went on to become the male tennis player of Atlanta, of Georgia by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He was selected as when he was like 16 and a half, 17. He got selected as a male tennis player of the year. Did a nice job. Had a huge serve. In developing him, I couldn't find what I thought was any real good instruction on the serve. All of it seemed sort of general and basic, and so I was looking for more detail, couldn't find it. So I started really studying video real hard because I felt like that was my weakest area. And it's sort of funny because in the process of studying it, developing the few key checkpoints that I thought were really important, teaching those to him when he was 12 and 13. All of a sudden, by the time he was 14, he was the biggest server in the 14s. By the time he was 16, he was approaching some of the biggest servers in the world at 16, and went on to have just a fantastic big serve. He won every fast serve contest he was ever in. And in fact, in one competition, he had to slow down his ball because the radar gun only went to 133, and it wouldn't pick up any serve. So I had to ask him to serve a medium fast second serve, and he was coming in at 126 and 127.
Wow.
So that's how he was able to win with the second serve in that event. But just gives you an idea how big his serve was, how amazing the speed and bite that he had on that serve. But that gave me confidence to dig in on the other strokes. I thought, well, hey, if I can dig in on the serve and recognize the key checkpoints, maybe some of the other strokes could do that. Could benefit from that. And one of the things that I was really focused on, I'd done some charting and some study of statistics and analytics, and I really had determined that from my standpoint, that the real key to becoming a top player, a lot of people focus on serve, return, and obviously you have to be good there, at least good, rallying a lot of people. But what I realized was the real separator, what separated the men from the boys, with two good players lined up, squared off. When you have Nadal and Federer playing, or you have Djokovic versus, Monfils or somebody. When the real men step up there, the separating item is how well they handle the midcourt ball. The guys who handle that midcourt ball the best on that day is the guy who's going to prevail in that match. Like even when we see like Federer versus Andy Roddick, if they didn't do well with the midcourt ball, then it didn't matter how good their serve was, didn't matter how good their return was, they probably were not going to prevail if they did not make the most of their what most people would call short ball opportunities. I call it midcourt ball to separate it. It's not the idea that you got to be really short or getting to net. It's that time when you can step inside the baseline. But usually your feet are behind the service line, that area there, which I consider sort of midcourt coverage area. And so I started to really focus in on that and how players could get better at that. And I also realized there was very little instruction. I mean, people would say, yeah, attack those balls, hit those balls aggressively, go down the line, general instruction like that. But there was very little focus on how to do it, how to go about it, and the different types of attacks. And the other thing there with of my development and everything is we started looking at the tennis had a lot of what I felt like were conflicts or incongruities, things where, like some person would coach, oh, you never lift up on your ground stroke, stay down. Then another coach is telling you, lift up. Some people really focus on more across. Some really focused on more extension through the court. The wrist position. I kept seeing all these conflicts, and it's like everybody had these different camps. And so I came up with Congruent tennis, try to find a way to bring congruency to eliminate some of these conflicts. We felt like we brought a higher resolution, understanding where, in what context, these different things would be true. When your wrist needed to be more flexed, when your wrist needed to be more in the extended or laid back position for contact. And there were answers to those questions. You didn't need to really be in one camp or the other. They were both right at certain times. You just need to understand the context where they were applicable. So then that's where we sort of came with the idea of congruent tennis, which hopefully we sort of put out that challenge in a very positive way. We challenge anybody to try to find things that are incongruent, not because we, are trying to be defensive, but it's the idea of, hey, if there's something that's incongruent, we want to point it out, and we want to be able to try to see if we can go in and find resolution and move forward with it. But we've done I think a fairly good job of really sorting out a lot of these conflicts, explaining the context. It was an alternative way to. In the past, most people would say tennis myths. They would say, oh, the myth of lifting up or the myth of staying down. Well, we don't call them myths. We just try to focus on getting a higher resolution. What's the context where this idea is true? What's the context where it doesn't apply as well? And we think that that's a better approach overall. But it's an inclusive approach because it's giving everybody's instruction, or most all instruction, it gives it credit for having areas where it's very useful and applicable.
Yeah, that's what I really like about your method, your system, is that it's not like the end all be all. You're willing to listen to others and take notice to some of the things that they have to share, and then fit it into the model and see and just kind of process it and see how it works. But you're never, so you're willing to ask more questions, and like you said, have this higher resolution. And so in my mind, it's brilliant. You're open to suggestions, which I love, right? It's not the end all be all.
That's correct. Not only are we willing, but we encourage. We really
Correct.
do encourage
Correct.
participation.
Yeah. And then going back to the serve and your son, our son Gianni, he's 6'2" now. So you guys, I don't even know if you'll recognize him. Yeah, he's 6'2". Wow. He just some of the things you guys taught him as far as the serve code. We can get into that. I mean, it's just, I think it's endless as far as the topics that we could share with you guys have to share with the group and people in general. But he's got a big boy serve, and a lot of it I owe to you guys.
He didn't come here with one.
He did not. No, I mean, it is simplified. It's amazing. And you talk about, Chuck and John, you guys talk about the serve code, and you talked about having this process. The serve code is the real deal. So make sure you guys follow Congruent Tennis. Wealth of knowledge, a lot of experience. It's not like these guys, it's their first rodeo. They've done this, they've had success, and I'm impressed, and I'm a believer. So thanks for sharing.
It's also worth noting, we only got to work with your son 2 times in like 24 hours.
Yeah.
While you're down visiting. So that's very, very rewarding to see that he's been able to carry on some of the. I think that's one of the things we do is we make it pretty simple so that you can also remember you don't need a coach there every minute. He's fortunate to have you as a coach there to reinforce those things, but you don't have to have somebody looking over your shoulder all the time because we've simplified things. I think in a way that people can remember and practice on their own.
And John, you got to see some of our players. Do you remember that little blonde Savoy?
I do.
Well, she just made her college team.
Really?
She didn't think she was going to do it. Yeah.
Congratulations.
So, anyway, yeah, it's in 1 year, she couldn't even play mini tennis. 12 months later, she will wind up having the rest of her college paid for. She's on an academic scholarship the first year, and all she has to do is stay on the team, and she's got her next 3 years paid.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive for a girl who couldn't even rally after taking 3 years of lessons, couldn't even play mini tennis.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? College.
3 years of lessons from somebody else.
Yeah.
Who claimed he was a world-class coach.
Well, there's something, you guys, I mean, really, like you have these checkpoints. You talked about checkpoints, Tom, as far as like the serve code, right? But there's little things within there, those little nuances and intricacies that a lot of coaches are missing out on. I got to see it firsthand, and I use them now. And so these guys are the real deal. Seriously, like you need to make sure you're following them and look for more information coming from, because they can help. I mean, a lot. So, all right. So let's get into the topics, because we have a lot to cover. We've got 3 topics. We'll start with mine first. John Carpenter wants to discuss extension on the strokes, and Chuck Tomlin wants to talk about the fade and draw. We see the fade and draw in a lot of other sports, like in soccer and golf. So the same thing can be implemented within tennis strokes. So let's get into them. So let's talk about the ATP versus WTA Forehand. I've been fortunate. We had media credentials at the Western and Southern Open in 2013 and 14. My brother and I. My brother did the majority of the filming, but I kind of tagged along and just grabbed some other cameras. But we were fortunate. We were up close and personal to the men and women. WTA forehand in my mind, little larger backswing, break the plane with the hand and the racket a lot of times. Players that I'd like to compare, Simona Halep, Madison Keys, have this larger take back, right? They break the plane with the forehand. And then the ATP forehand, we look at guys like, like Federer, Dimitrov, Yannick Sinner, they don't break the plane. They keep that racket head in hand for the most part on the right side of their body.
Kostiak on the women's tour.
Yes. But then you got gals like, like Swiatek, right? She's got more of a ATP forehand where she keeps things more on the right side of the body. What are your thoughts? I mean, let's say you got a junior coming up through the ranks and, he or she has this WTA forehand. Is it a detriment? Is it harder to find the ball? Guys like Oscar Wagner, track with those hands in front, keep that hand a little closer to the ball if it comes in fast, a little more take back if it's slower. What are your thoughts, on this ATP WTA forehand? I'd be interested to hear.
Well, I think the one key issue there is how important is taking the ball on the rise in your game. In the ladies' game, it's probably a little less important, which is why I think a lot of the ladies can end up getting away with it a little. And even on the Pro Tour, you see certain men like Nadal and Dominic Thiem, who on the forehand side tend to play very deep and let the ball drop before they hit it. I think when you're doing that, you have more time to use a WTA if you want to, even though both of those players don't. But that dropping ball, I think will accommodate the wrap swing. We just call the WTA refer to it as like a wrap swing because the head of the racket wraps around behind you. I think the key to the ATP is, the more you want to take the ball in the rise, the more you want to press forward, the more, and I think it's also very helpful for returning serve because face it, when you're returning big serves, the ball's going to be rising when it gets to you unless you want to stand back by the fence. And even then, it might still be rising if the server is big enough. So for taking balls on the rise and playing more up in the court, and also it's very, very helpful to when you're taking the ball, those mid-court attacks that I mentioned earlier. Would I say it's detrimental? That's a tough one because obviously some very good players have been able to work through it. I would say that probably fewer and fewer will be able to be very successful with it go forward, because I think when it really comes down to it, when you wrap the tip back further behind you like that, you're dealing with certain inertia and momentum effects that when you try to catch up to a ball, especially a rising ball, that makes it tough to get the timing to work out. Whereas in my opinion, that's the advantage of the ATP type, where you keep it on the same side. If you do it correctly, you can be very responsive to the ball. You can catch up to virtually anything. If you're a little bit behind in your swing, if it's a big serve and you need to get there quick, you have that ability to catch up and get to the contact point on time.
Right. What about, it's interesting. I just played a match last night. I played a kid. He's a teaching pro at one of our local clubs. And we played like 5 days ago. We went 3 sets. I played him last night and I beat him 3-0. And he's probably 26 years old. I'm 50. So, but anyway, my point being is what I started doing is, and this is kind of like a testament to CTM, I started looking to take the ball earlier on the rise. And I noticed in some of the videos that I was shooting recently, like on the slinger bag, I was taking more of a WTA, like I was taking a larger backswing, breaking the plane, not keeping the racket head in hand on the right side of the body. And I just felt like I wasn't generating more power necessarily, and I was taking a lot from behind the baseline. So when I played him last night, my goal was take more on the rise, keep the hand on the right side, not breaking the plane. And it was amazing. The difference, Chuck, like, you guys talk about 2 feet inside the baseline and taking that mid-court ball. That's exactly what I did last night, taking balls early on the rise. And I just I took them apart pretty good. So I'm a fan of, your methodologies
Shot
and
matching,
shot matching, taking
which is,
balls.
I think, is the number one pioneering innovation in tennis today.
And when I get this mid-court
And
ball, I
there's
know
the
we've
inventor.
talked about this before, but I'm not necessarily trying, sometimes we get enamored with power. A lot of times when I was taking this ball early, I wasn't looking to increase the speed. I was looking to match it, or maybe even decrease sometimes and go to the net if I did.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're doing a good job of managing your court positioning as well. That's one of the things that, if I ever had to say there was one thing that every coach and every player seems to think they know, but when I watch them play, I don't see a lot of evidence of it. It seems to be understanding what part of the court they can attack in and what part they need to be more or less rallying. Now, I know a lot of people think rallying means you're not trying to get ahead of the point, but the way we teach to rally is that you should be, you can be, the whole DNO idea of that you can be defensive, you can be offensive, you can be very aggressive, but you're still not on the attack yet when you're back behind the baseline. But then when you can get your feet inside the baseline. Now the pros, it's a little different. If you're Roger Federer and had his forehand, or Djokovic's, all you got to do is get 1 foot on that baseline, and you're probably within the range because you have the skill as well as the power to take advantage of that. Even though for most of us we need a little bit more of a head, a little bit more of a head start. For most of us, we need to be at least both feet inside the baseline. And now you've put enough things on your side to be able to execute an attack really well. You're able to attack well enough that you've got a much better chance of being successful and accomplishing something.
Yeah.
And of course, then matching the type of swing and stroke to that, that's why we call it congruent tennis, because all these things have to match. If you're back there 4 feet behind the baseline, and now you're trying to hit, even one of the shots we teach, but if you're trying to hit it from 4 feet behind the baseline and trying to hit a foot over the net with a power fade, that's not congruent with where your court positioning is. And that's another reason we refer to it as congruent tennis. All these things have to match up. You have to have the right court positioning, the right shot, and the right incoming ball. When those 3 things match, you greatly increase your chance of a high level of execution and success.
Yeah. And I'd like to add something to this on this debate about the head of the WTA coaches organization calls it the right side swing, and actually, I got to give Susan Nardi credit for this. She hated the ATP because she said she always hit it and women always hit it, because I had showed her in some of these books and things like that, and she had gone back in history. I think all women and men, somewhere around the 50s, it started to change. But the greats of women's tennis and the greats in men's tennis pretty much hit their forehand, were taught the same way. And then somewhere this bigger swing evolved for whatever reason. The C, a little wrap around, break the plane. Leighton Hewitt used it. Bjorn Borg used it. And I mentioned Savoy earlier. That's a good example. And I just got done talking with this about Chuck, and she just sent us congratulations and thanks for everything. But my point is that we had a little bit of a debate. 1 year, and she's in her junior year, going into her senior year. How's she going to win a college tennis scholarship? She's got a big wraparound forehand. So we compromised, because I said, look, if you can hit this well, so she hit an ATP on her redirect and a WTA on pretty much everything else. And you know what? Well, Chuck, you've seen her redirect game. She got a really even better since you were here.
Well, she may actually be a good example of the best of both worlds, because, and you see a lot of the top players do it. It's just maybe not quite as noticeable. And this is where the fade and draw come in. I know it's sort of slipping in early in the conversation here, but it does affect everything you do on the ground stroke level. When you're hitting more of a draw, you're going to tend to break the plane and go back, be it more of a WTA or whatever people want to call it. I call it more of a wrap swing. You're going to wrap it up more generally with a good draw. And so I think that's what she was doing. She tends to hit a draw quite a bit, and so when she's doing that, she uses the big wrap swing and uses it very effectively for a draw. Then when she wants to redirect or fade a shot, she tends to shorten it up a little bit, stay on the same side. So probably there's an element of using both that players need to learn.
Right.
Based on what type shot they're going to hit.
And I agree with that. And I think that also explains why we're seeing, again, Chuck and I were discussing and practicing some of the different forehand stances, why people are moving into that closed stance. Okay. With that WTA swing, you can move into that closed stance really well on the forehand sometimes to reach out to the outside of the ball and then swing around with your right shoulder, and so even Swiatek is learning this swing right now. And I notice she's doing that more. Now she does have that shortened swing, but if you look at her, she's a little long when she turns around and crosses because she knows she's got to get to that outside of the ball to swing it back around cross court. So I think it's best, at least in developmental stages, not to pigeonhole people and say you have to do it this way, you have to do it that. And I think the congruent tennis model will help coaches see that there are advantages to both, and maybe we don't want to turn our players into robots. I think that's the biggest problem in tennis instruction. And you saw that, John. None of our players play the same way. I mean, you can't tell a CTM player like you can, oh, he's coached by that because they all hit that. Bollettieri's all had the big power forehand. Another coach has come here and noticed that all of our players play individualistically because we're into shot shaping and tactics more than we are into necessarily mechanics. Do you agree with that, Chuck?
Well, I think we're very much into mechanics as well, but I think that our mechanics are more of a guideline, and they don't turn people into robots because depending on your own swing style, where I think this comes in is a lot of coaches not only coach the fundamentals, but they spend a lot of time teaching style and another thing that I call amplitude. Some people call it magnitude. But if you're trying to hit a huge forehand, you have to turn the shoulders more, more amplitude. Some coaches coach forehands and they're coaching in that huge amplitude. Well, what if a player's in a situation where they don't need so much amplitude? You might think, well, they'll naturally shorten down and use less. Well, if they've been trained always to hit that big max amplitude shot, then that's where you see these kids a lot of times miss on balls where they didn't need to hit it that big but that's the only forehand they know is just to slam everything with max amplitude. So when we come in here and teach more fundamentals, then we let the styles and amplitude sort of develop themselves. And so players develop their own individual style. And the same thing, we teach the slice and the topspin, whereas a lot of coaches have said, early on, especially early on, they don't allow the kids to slice or whatever because they want them to really focus on the topspin. But when you teach both, then some players will, maybe be a little bit like Steffi Graf. Maybe they want to be more of a, work the slice in more in their game.
Yeah.
It becomes more part. Maybe they don't. Now, Steffi's probably a bad example because she was nearly exclusively slicing. None of our players have done that. But, like one player may slice more, another player may topspin more, but that's more individual style, for them to make that decision based on how they like to take the ball. So I think it's more about the fundamentals that we push, and we try to avoid dictating style, and we try to just give good guidance about amplitude.
Got it. Okay. All right, let's move on. I know we've got more topics. That's great stuff. We could probably talk about ATP, WTA forehands for 5 hours. Let's move on to you, John, with the extension. There's this thought that, more extension, if you're going to, you really hit through the ball, you need to really extend. The old school thought was like point your racket to the target. That's really old school. But what are your thoughts on extension and how it is incorporated with CTM?
Okay. Well, when I got back into coaching in around 1998 and decided, I was going to take one more shot at this at the end of 1998, the Advanced Tennis Project by John Yandel had come out. And boy, that initial release was incredible. It was the talk of the tennis world for probably the next 3 or 4 years, maybe even 5 years, nonstop. And when we looked at the film and everything, you heard the word extension a lot. And of course, then Federer came on the scene. around 2003. I guess he started really dominating, won his first Wimbledon. And everybody talked about, Federer's straight arm, which he didn't use at the time, but, the arm out like this. But I just want to point out, how can you extend when you're hitting a tennis ball with your arm extended? Okay, if my arm is extended like this, as full as it is, how can I extend through the shot? Okay, so that's the first question that came up. And then once I got into the book in 2005, 2006, 2007, in terms of, when you look at almost 2,000 tennis books and you hear the word extension taught, I realized that they were, a lot of coaches were teaching across the ball, but they were silenced because people had this gun barrel analogy. The longer the gun barrel, the straighter the bullet, right? And this was the idea that Bill Tilden went in this direction. Unfortunately, I think for tennis, in terms of how to hit the forehand, and who was going to question Bill Tilden. So the idea of going through the back of the ball, became the predominant way for the turn, step, and hit and everything. Everybody started changing after the Advanced Tennis Project, because we could see they were hitting across the ball. We have the films of the rackets, lined up. We now know Federer hits like this. You got the famous one that Jeff Counts made for High Tech Tennis of Nalbandian. That was one of the early pictures of the racket, literally going like this, the true windshield wiper. Okay, you don't see that any extension through the ball. Slight extension, as Chuck says, you hit every ball up, through, and across on a diagonal. So even what looks like the windshield wiper, see how my hand is slightly moving forward in relation, to the background? So there's that diagonal, and then it leaves the ball. So I saw coaches were teaching, drag the racket pre-World War I. Okay, now think about that. How are you going to drag the racket if you're extending through it? How can you drag the ball on the strings? So when I met Oscar Wegner, that was the first thing he taught. He taught drag the racket, and he taught to go ahead and literally hit across the ball, things like that. So he was against the use of extension. I still, very rarely do I ever use the word. I used to use it a lot more, okay? And I'm not saying I didn't have success with it, because you can extend through the ball and push it over the net a certain amount, especially from a neutral stance, especially if you're coordinated, know how to hold the wrist back. But I think the word is overrated even today. I think if you understand how to hit a shot on the rise, and I credit Chuck with being the first coach in tennis history in 2,000 books and 15 years of research to actually define how to hit a ball on the rise properly within the maximum window. I think extension does occur naturally. Because I don't teach a WTA or an ATP, we start them with as short a backswing as possible, okay? As short. So we actually do kind of start everybody with a right side swing, okay? And then it may or may not develop into what is called, the backside swing. I guess I'll get away from the gender emphasis. So because they do that naturally, especially when you learn to shot match, and I'll let Chuck explain this, but I find that to go ahead and hit the rising ball, a lot of times I hit with a straight arm. I never hit with a straight arm. And now I find I happen to do it naturally because I'm focusing on the contact point on the ball. Of course, we stay off the back of the ball. And on the rising ball, Chuck will explain, there's a certain part of the ball, certain corner of the ball you want to get to. So I think extension is way overrated. It's why I predicted that Madison Keys would never win a major tournament. I said it 5 years ago. I still hold by that. I'm never surprised that she gets knocked out as she has to go up through the higher ranks because she hits too hard. She does not know how to shot shape. And I think it accounts for her inconsistencies and her frustrations. And I really do believe if she knew how to shot match, she wouldn't come out with so many errors. So that's my words on extension. Chuck, you want to add anything?
Well, I think this is one of those good examples of how congruent tennis handles things. Is that, it depends on where the player is doing it. If they're pulling across too much and they're not putting enough power into the ball, then by all means, we're going to push on getting more extension. But we're never going to try to have them extend down the gun barrel toward the target. So there's a range in between there, between straight across and down the gun barrel. And all the strokes need to be between there. They don't need to be straight across and they don't need to be down the gun barrel. So if you understand extension within that realm, and that's the context you use it, then extension is awesome, because the more you extend through the ball on that, with that nature, the more you're going to be able to impart your power and drive through part of the ball. On the other hand, if you're thinking about down the gun barrel, it's actually going to impede your swing. You're going to end up pushing the ball more. Generally, see people trying to swing down the gun barrel, they swing too fast, too early. Then as they try to push out on the ball, mainly because they miss so much, they miss so many shots trying to continue, fire directly through the ball, they'll start to slow down as a compensation, because they know they can't swing like that, subconsciously. They may not know, in a cognizant fashion. Yeah, they may not know, and they may not be cognizant of it, but their body knows that if they continue to swing that fast down the gun barrel, they're probably just going to launch a home run. They're probably not going to make a high percentage of shots. So what you'll see them is slowing down through contact. Whereas if you learn to think of extension, extension as an element of how you go through the across aspect of the ball, then it's excellent, and it will you can vary that extension based on the amount of power and drive you want to get into it. And that saves you from having to slow your racket down. So you can actually seek to accelerate your racket as you go through and across, as opposed to people who try to go down the gun barrel, who generally will end up slowing down the racket, And I think that's one of the things that coaches do, finding the context where the coaching actually works. Because I don't like this coaching, but it probably does have an element of working. They say, go out and try to hit the ball hard, and eventually you'll learn to get it in. Well, what happens is you hit it hard, you're launching balls long, you're a terrible player, and you eventually learn to start working across the ball. If you're going to start getting them in, that's how you're going to learn to do it. Now, you're not necessarily going to know what you did or what adjustment you did. Now, some people might be fine with that, and they might say, well, you don't need to know everything you're doing. But what I find also is a very important part. I think we've all seen it as coaches, where people lose their stroke. They find a groove where they're doing pretty good and they're hitting pretty well, and then all of a sudden something changes and it goes away. Maybe they got a piece of instruction that wasn't congruent with what they were doing. Maybe they played an opponent where their swing had to get altered. But all of a sudden, because they didn't understand what they were doing, they don't know how to get back to where they were. So I like to have a certain level of understanding, at least a basic level of understanding of how to go through the ball, so that I actually have a theory related to Nadal that might be interesting at this point. Is I feel like that when Nadal is injured and he's off the tour for a while, he's on the practice courts, I think that he has a lot of focus from his coaching staff historically on going, more extension and out through the ball. And that's why when he comes back, that's where we see him have these terrible, horrible losses, because he's not able to have the ball control. Once he gets back on tour and starts swinging more freely, gets comfortable, gets more instinctive with his swing, then we see he's one of the greatest players of all time, and he starts to dominate the game. Because when he's on tour and he's playing tour strokes without excessive coaching, he starts hitting across the ball much better. But the more you see him off the tour in the practice courts, I think you see him hitting out through the ball, focus more on extension, and then he loses control of the ball because he's not using the cross function very well.
Interesting.
I think that's a high-level example where that understanding could be very helpful.
Good. Yeah, I did some filming last week, and I was telling you guys, shared this with you guys earlier, that I was hitting up and across, just really trying to tight spin, still hitting through it, but across the ball. And when I watched the video in slow motion, you could see that I was naturally getting extension, just from the racket head speed, the arm would naturally extend, but I wasn't thinking to fully extend. But it happened naturally because of the racket head speed, and the inertia and the physics of the whole stroke. So pretty interesting. Let's move on to the fade and the draw, Chuck. We've got about 9 minutes left. So let's go ahead and discuss the draw and the fade. Similar to other sports, share with us, with the group, kind of your thoughts on that.
Well, the main thing about the fade and draw is to understand that these two aspects exist. I mean, we all sort of know, but I think people think of them as specialty shots. Everybody's seen Nadal hit the banana shot down the line where the ball is out and it curves in. And those are, if he does that with his forehand down the line, that's a draw. He's drawing the ball back to the court. And then we've all seen the fades where somebody hits an inside-out forehand and they hit that spin. I'm not saying all inside-out forehands have the fade spin, but quite a few do. What's that? The Kvitova?
Petra Kvitova.
You watch her; she has a really good power fade. It's a good example on the women's tour. And she hits a top spin that has about this much tilt. Instead of being right up here, the spin is tilted all the way. Sometimes I saw one last night. She hit gorgeous for a winner, where the spin was probably 25 degrees from like 25 degrees up like that. Still top spin. Most people. In fact, the announcers made a comment about the amount of side spin. They were calling it a side spin shot. I think that loses. I mean, it's not incorrect, but in a higher resolution, you understand that it's still an element of topspin, because that's what we need in tennis to bring the ball down, is the topspin. So when you realize that these shots are real and that they're out there, because I've had some coaches say, "Oh, that's not a real shot." And I've also been in practices where somebody hits a fair amount of a side spin like that, and the coach says, "Oh, no, you're doing it wrong. You're getting too much side spin. You get too much side spin there," and they coach them away from it. And I think that's a big mistake, to coach people away from it, because the actual amounts of side spin, where it's tilted this way or that way, are probably some of the most important qualities to have on your ball to gain feel and control. The actual tilted topspin, they add to your feel, they add to your control, and just like in golf, and just like in soccer, just like in place kicking in football, all the greats are using these type spins to control and feel the ball, and that's why they're the best. I was really, I even surprised myself by saying, well, let's see, when should we hit straight over the top? When should our spin be right over the 12 o'clock position? And I started studying it. I couldn't find any time where you needed to try to focus on doing that. And I feel like that to try to focus on that will actually spoil your swing. It'll actually cause the swing to become mechanical, and because there's no other way to get that other than trying to use your hand to push out over the top of the ball. And the moment you have that intent, you spoil the natural swing shape, and now you're going to not have the good acceleration that comes with a natural swing shape. You're going to spoil the swing, and you're going to lose some feel and control when you do that.
Can I ask you this question?
Sure.
So as far as the spin, right, on what axis you're spinning the ball on, right? So sometimes it might be more of a side spin. Is it determined by the height of the ball, or is it more intent, like what your intent is to do with the ball, or is it the height of the ball? So maybe you get a higher ball on the forehand where maybe you can go up and across the ball a little bit more, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
That's the part that's a little bit challenging to learn, although once you learn it, it's really simple. In other words, like for me, if I'm on the court, it's all just, automatic, but it has different factors. Like one of the factors is height of the contact. That does play a role. The other thing that plays a role is the ball rising or dropping. So in general, there's exceptions, but in general, if the ball's rising, it usually helps to use a fade spin to work off the inside of the ball. It's the best way to control and feel a rising ball. I won't even get into the exceptions, but there are reasons to draw like a low, like if you have a really low ball that you're taking right off the deck. There's a time where you might want to, work a draw to the outside, just because you can't, or because it's low and close to your body or something, you can't really get to the inside. So the next best thing is to work the outside of the ball. Since you can't work the inside because you're jammed or whatever, you can go to the outside. And we see players do these all the time naturally. Good players can, like announcers will say, "Oh, look at them create! Look how creative they are." But they're, in a way, they're not. They are being creative because they probably weren't taught to do that like we do our players. But at the same time, it really fits within a very good system. So the rising and falling of the ball, that's one of the biggest things that's left out. Even though we're talking about taking the ball on the rise, it's funny how nobody seems to account for the rising versus the falling ball and how the stroke would tend to be different.
Interesting.
I would say that the controlling factor tends to be the height more than more than the other things. So that is very useful because it's usually a fade spin that works better, especially on the higher balls. It's hard. It's just really hard to get up into the outside of the ball or even the back of the ball on a high ball. It's just really comfortable to come in here and work right off the inside.
Got it.
So the fade and the draw, once you realize that basically almost every shot you hit should be a version of the fade and the draw. The spin should either be tilted, going over to the right side, or the spin should be going over to the left side. Once you realize that it should be spinning off to one side or the other almost every shot, you're going to be surprised at how much feel and control. Well, now what if you get really good feel and control? What does that lead to? The ability to add more power, right? Because if you can feel the ball and control it and work it, now you can add power because you have that ability to manage the ball so well, and now you can actually hit bigger shots.
Yeah,
So-
this is one thing too we talked about, and I found fascinating how the fade and draw create more feel, more control. You can add power. We were talking about place kickers, right? Field goal
Right.
kickers. And back in the day, it was a straight on kick, right? Then you had the advent of the soccer style kick, and they were able to fade and draw the ball a little bit with kicking, right? And they're able to
Absolutely.
add distance as well. And that's more of an angular motion with the soccer style. And look what that's done for kicking, right?
And it took decades for American players and coaches to wrap their head around that because it's not intuitive, or maybe you might say not logical, because you would look at that and you'd go, man, that would be too hard to control. But in essence, in the end, they have more power and more control, just like you do with the stroke.
Yep, exactly. So it's not just in tennis that you can implement the fade and draw or this type of style where you're coming inside the ball. You do get more feel, you do get more control. Why players aren't learning this way, they might be doing it instinctively, but why more coaches aren't teaching players to hit up and across, right? To generate more feel, more control.
Well, hopefully CTM will really change that because it'll provide that more or less lesson plan, so to speak, for somebody to go by and have a better understanding of it. One example we almost take for granted now is on the slice. You don't really see I don't see many people trying to slice directly under. I don't think he can even teach it that way too much now. I think mostly they're understanding that you should have that diagonal slice. We see the pros almost every time that they hit a little slice, and we'll see the ball when it hits, it bounces over to the side, and that's because it's got that element of side spin to the slice. And so we're just expanding out, giving a teaching platform to help the coaches understand, when. And that was a big thing also. Once I started dividing things into left and right spins, then you start thinking about, well, when is it better to use one than the other? Like, for example, it's really, if you can hit a fade to the left side where it's going to fade back to the right, it's very effective in jamming players. Or same thing, if you hit a draw and you hit out to the right, and you're drawing it back to the left into the body, you can sometimes even get the player to step into the ball. They step over, think they're getting closer to the ball, and they're actually stepping into the way the ball's going to work. That's very effective. Because we use with the smart target system, we use basically the three targets. You got the one on the right, the one on the left, and then the third target is going for the jammer and jamming up your player. So if you can incorporate that third target of jamming your player by using a fade draw, it's a lot tougher for the player to step out of the way and adjust to those fade and draws into the body.
Yeah. All right, guys, I've got to wrap it up right there. This has been fantastic. So once again, if people want to learn more about CTM, where do they go? Facebook, your website? Go ahead and give that information.
Congruenttennis.com, congruenttennis.com. And just to add, there's some historical articles from other coaches. You know, Dave Smith and other people have articles on there. I think Roscoe Tanner just published one on there.
Roscoe Tanner.
And because we've been talking to him and offering to help him out with some things that he's doing in tennis.
He's invited me to come down there to work with his daughter here in the next couple of weeks. He's interested in her learning about the fade and the draw. And he was even quite impressed with the serve code. Even though he was maybe one of the greatest servers in history, I shouldn't even say maybe, he was one of the greatest servers in history without a doubt. He's interested enough in the serve code because he was really shocked to see somebody teaching things that were actually contain the elements of how he did his way he taught. Roscoe Tanner was even a little bit surprised in his day when his slice serves turned out to be his biggest. When he hit 153, it was on a slice serve, not a flat serve. And so for Vic Braden and for him and what's the guy's name who was the scientist? Ariel.
Gideon Ariel.
Gideon Ariel.
Yeah.
They were all very surprised that, and I explained some of our theories of why we think that that if you use a proper top slice serve, why we think those would produce bigger, faster capabilities with the tennis ball. And he was surprised when it happened, and then he was very interested in some of my explanations about it. So,
nice. Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, seriously, we could go on and do this for 3 hours. This is absolutely amazing. And then you're in the Atlanta area too, right? I mean, if people are looking for lessons or they can go to Congruent Tennis and get your information. If you've got some kids, you're someone looking to take your player, your son or daughter to the next level, give these guys a call. They are the real deal. So, and I'm sure we got to do this again, you guys. This has been awesome. We've got plenty of topics that we could discuss. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. So
this is a geek session.
It is. It is. I wish I had something like this to listen. Like if I'm on my car, you got a long commute, just kind of put this on and just listen to it. I could geek out over this all the time. So you guys, thanks so much for your time and the information you shared. And let's do it again. All right. Have a great day.
All right. Goodbye.